Hey guys, Frank Cox here. If you're new to smoker building, I'm sure that you've asked the question, what welder should I get? So on this podcast episode, we're going to take a little dive into answering that question for you. You're listening to the Pitmaster Secrets podcast. So I get this question asked a lot about, from guys that are new to building smokers and that kind of thing. And inevitably they start building a pit. Maybe they bolted it together, or they tried to find every way they know how to get around actually welding a smoker together. But, in order to keep moving and keep building and make a better cooker, eventually they're going to have to break down and get themselves a welder. So inevitably they'll ask me, what kind of welder should I get? So here we go. We're going to take a dive. We're going to cover this in 3 points. The first one here is, what type of welder should I get? So the 3 major types of welders that you can go to any welding supply store and get are TIG welders, stick welders, and MIG welders, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is TIG welders. And, while it's not real practical to use a TIG welder for building a smoker, you got to, TIG welding, you got a electrode that basically makes a sort of a torch, and you've got to stick a rod of, whatever alloy you're using for filler metal, and you're basically using an electronic torch to weld with. It's a really, really nice looking weld. It is fun to do. But it's not cheap, and it's also, you got to really be particular with metal prep and things like that. Make sure that you got all the mill scale off the joint where you're trying to weld. You got to, there can't be any dross or anything like that. And it's a lot more tedious to learn how to weld. Now, there are some instances building cookers where a TIG welder would come in handy. Say if you've got a piece of stainless or something you're trying to incorporate into your build, or like a cast iron hand wheel or something, you can preheat the cast, and there's special filler rod and stuff like that you can use in order to put that together. So there's some applications where it would come in handy, but just for welding steel, you're using straight argon with TIG welding, and it can be real expensive. There's other gases you can use for purge gas, but for shield gas. But anyway, it's just really, in my opinion, the TIG welder's not really worth it because of the added cost and the amount of careful prep that you have to do to weld with. So I wouldn't recommend that. Now, stick welding's affordable. You can get a little buzz box real cheap. They're reliable. You can run it pretty much. Everybody's grandpa had one. They just plug it in the garage on a 220, 240 volt outlet. You're using a rod that has flux on the outside of it. There's different tensile strengths of rods, like 60 series, 70 series, and 80 series, They all have different jobs, so kind of knowing what rod to use is a little bit of a pain, depending on what you're welding, if you're new to it. But it is a really affordable method of welding, so you could use a stick welder for that. One of the cons is of this type of welding is you're going to have a lot of cleanup. You're going to have to clean up your weld after you do it. It's real hard to get a really nice, pretty bead laid, until you've had a lot of practice. Getting that, polished off weld, it's kind of tough to get, unless you're using like 70-18 or something. But anyway, so if your budget is a concern, stick welding is probably a really good idea to start with. And the other thing is, a small box will give you a lot more capacity on thickness of steel you can weld. So that's another good thing about it. But for the cleanup, I'm going to say don't start there. So the third type of welding is actually what I recommend, which is MIG welding. So MIG welding, you don't have to deal with the filler rod of any kind. You're not going to have to dab like you would with TIG welding. You're not going to have to dab a filler rod into the puddle. With stick welding, you're not going to have this flux cord or this flux mess to clean up. With the flux that gathers on top of your weld bead, you're not going to have to hit it with a wire wheel when you're done. With MIG welding, you have a gun in your hand and there's a wire feeder inside the welder, and it continuously feeds wire into the puddle all you got to do is pull the trigger and know how to run a good pattern. That'll give you a good bead. The other thing is that you can get MIG welders in all different sizes. So like if you don't have 220 volts in your garage, you can get like a 180 amp machine that'll run off of a 110 volt outlet. So like a Millermatic 180 or something. Some of the smaller Rebel machines are dual volt, or ESOB Rebels and stuff. So you can get your start with a really good MIG welder. You won't have to do all the cleanup if you're using shield gas, because what happens is as the wire comes out of the nozzle, there's also, if you're using the gas type of MIG welding, there's also shield gas that blows out around the puddle where you're welding, and that's going to keep the area pure so that you can get a good weld joint without a bunch of porosity and stuff in it. And so anyway, it's the easiest to learn, in my opinion, because you can sit there and just continually burn wire. You ain't gonna run out as easy. You can put some of these machines can hold a 40-pound spool of wire, which is a lot of wire. So I'm going to recommend MIG welding for you to start with. As far as like what size should you get, it really depends on what kind of smoker you want to build to start with. So you can get the size of a welder goes by amperage. So you'll see like a Rebel 140, 185, whatever the size is, 200 amps and higher, like a 225, 250, 285. There's all these different sizes, and that's the amperage of the machine, or how much power it's going to put into the weld that you're doing. So that's going to help you to burn into the base metal deeper, depending on what thickness of material you're using. So a smaller amp machine like a 135 or a 140 isn't going to get you as much penetration as a 200 plus amp machine would. So it just depends on what thickness. So for a 1/4 inch, that's what we're going to build a stick burner out of, like any kind of offset. We're generally going to use 1/4 inch material on that, and something around a 180 amp machine is probably the best place to start. You can use a smaller machine. I built a lot of smokers with a 140 amp machine. You just have to be a lot more careful. When you get into smaller amp capacity machines, you're going to have this thing called duty cycle. And duty cycle means what percentage of time that the welder can actually run before it starts losing capacity and needs to cool off. So, on a smaller amp machine like a 135, 140, you're not going to be able to run that machine continuously for an entire hour of welding. You're going to have to, let it cool off here and there. So you might have to do stitch welds. You might also have to do multiple passes. So you'll wind up putting a V groove in your plate where the two joints come together, so that you can put a small pass in first and then cover it with a filler and a cap to go over the top of your root. So we'll get into that on other stuff. But so on the bigger machines, you don't have to do it. If you get for a 1/4 inch, if you start out with a machine that's like 180 or like a 225 or something like that, that thing will weld 1/4 all day long, no problem. So you can make one pass and save yourself a lot of time and material. So as far as like on these kind of welders, we're going to want to talk about like gas. Like, are we going to get a gas kind of wire or machine, or are we going to do flux core? So I would recommend that if money is an object and you want to get in with a MIG welder, you can start out with what's called inner shield or flux core inner shield wire. This wire looks like regular welding wire, but there's actually a core shield inside the wire that is the same kind of flux that's on the outside of the stick rods. You know, it's very affordable because you don't have to you know, buy gas to feed this machine. You can actually just pull the trigger and start welding. The one downside to using flux core is it's messy and there's a lot of spatter. Like there'll be spatter sprayed everywhere, you know, so it can be a bit messy to clean up. The girl's gonna talk here in a minute on the GPS, just so you know. But anyway, I gotta look at my thing, sorry. That's what happens when you do this in the truck. So anyway, you're gonna have a big mess to clean up. It's gonna leave a lot of spatter everywhere. You're still gonna have the flux shielding on top of it that you're gonna have to clean off. You know, just kind of keep all that in mind. I would probably recommend that you go with gas, shielding gas instead of flux core. One main reason I'll recommend that is it is a little bit more money, you know, as far as the cost of welding, but you're not going to have near as much cleanup to do when you're welding. It's going to be a lot nicer weld. You're not going to have to like clean that flux off of the top of your weld joint. You're not going to have near as much spatter.
Stay in the left lane.
So if you when you get your start, you know, just I recommend going with gas.
Continue onto US 59.
But you also need to know what kind of gas to get. So that can be a little bit tricky. I mean,
Quarters of a mile. Turn left onto County Road.
I gotta listen. 3/4 of a mile, turn left. So on gas welding, you know, gas shielded MIG welding, we're going to have to pay attention to what kind of gas we're using. You know, it's actually like most everything you weld, you're going to use a 75-25, which is just regular old, you know, MIG welding gas. It's available everywhere. That'll be used mostly for steel. But when you get into welding with different kinds of wire or different kinds of processes, you might have to change the kind of gas that you're using. For instance, with spray arc, which spray arc is really high amps, really fast wire speed, and
turn left onto County Road 4000.
Oh, I think she's taking me for a ride. Hang on. Is this it? Yes, this is it. Right on, here we go.
For 27 miles, continue straight.
For spray arc, for instance, you have really high amps that you're running on the machine, and you have really high wire speed. And we're literally spraying like the wire. You would think the wire would be touching the base metal and melting at the point of contact, but actually it's a lot higher up off the material, and it's just spraying that molten metal into the weld, and it's a lot hotter, so it gets better penetration. It's a really clean weld. There's no spatter around it. Doing that kind of process, you're going to wind up using what's called 90-10. Which is just a different mix of gases. So the gas mixture has to match the wire type you're using and the process that you're using, as well as the base metal that you're trying to melt together, you know. So that's one thing that you'll have to pay attention to when you're getting into it. If you're just doing 1/4-inch plate, then you're going to wind up using just regular old MIG welding wire. You can get it anywhere, and 75-25 gas. Now, where do you get the gas? So that's easy too. Pretty much every town has a welding supply store, or if they don't have a welding supply store, they've got what's called a drop-off point. Usually it's like a local welding shop or something like that, or a hardware store, and that company will actually, the welding supply company will actually drop bottles off there for you to go exchange your bottle. This is the skinny but real tall, heavy bottle that's usually filled with pressurized gas in it, you know. So those bottles are typically owned by the welding supply company. So you have to choose who you're going to use. For instance, Air Gas or, Prax Air, or some of these, there's a lot of mom and pop shops. So around here we got Metal Weld or Ozark Gas. So you choose who you're going to use based on price and availability, and then, how easy they are to deal with. But they have their bottles. Some companies do what's called a lifetime lease, which means once you get a lease on that bottle, it's a 99-year lease, and it doesn't cost you. You pay up front. It's your bottle basically for that period of time, and then you can only exchange it with them. Or you can rent a bottle. If you don't think you're going to need gas all the time, you're just doing one pit here and there, then I would just rent a bottle. You can usually get like 3 bottles a month for the big bottles for about $30 a month, just depending on who you're talking to. That way you're not married to a bottle. You just use it for a month or so, and then you turn it in when you're done. So anyway, I hope you find this useful. We're going to start focusing a little bit more on some smoker building related material. We're actually en route right now to go see a buddy of ours that we're doing a YouTube video with about learning how to weld. So make sure, if you don't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel, because that's where a lot of the stuff that you hear me talking about, we actually have video to support that, and you can see the full picture there. Please review the podcast and subscribe if you haven't already. And anyway, appreciate your time. Let us know how else we can help you. All you got to do is go to SmokerBuilder.com and get involved. We'll see you later.